Amara never imagined that the woman she called her sister, the one who once wiped her tears and shared her laughter, would one day become her greatest enemy. But on that cold, silent night, hidden in the shadows, she saw it with her own eyes. Linda, whispering incantations, scattering strange powders near her children's window. Amara's heart pounded as realization struck like lightning. The very hands that once embraced her family were now trying to destroy it. How did love turn into something so dark? And how far had Linda gone in her desperate search for a child? Amara and Linda grew up as more than friends. They were like sisters. They played in the dusty village paths as children, shared meals at each other's homes, and promised to always stand by each other. Their families were close, and even after they got married, their friendship remained unshaken. Amara, now a mother of 4, often found comfort in Linda's presence, trusting her with secrets and joys. Linda, though unable to conceive, loved Amara's children dearly and treated them as if they were her own. At first, Linda found happiness in watching Amara's children grow, filling the void in her heart with their laughter. She braided their hair, told them bedtime stories, and comforted them when they were sick. Her husband, too, admired her kindness, often saying that if motherhood was about love and care, then Linda was already a mother in every way. Linda smiled at his words, but deep inside an ache remained, a growing void that only deepened with time. As the years passed, Linda's pain turned into silent longing. Every time she heard a baby cry in the marketplace, she felt a stab of sorrow. Every christening ceremony reminded her of what she didn't have. While Amara's house was filled with the joyful chaos of children, Linda's home remained painfully quiet. She prayed relentlessly, visiting herbalists, pastors, and doctors. But each time the answer was the same: there was no medical reason she couldn't conceive. Yet, the years dragged on, and hope began to slip through her fingers. Amara, sensing Linda's struggle, tried to comfort her. "Children will come when it's time," she would say, holding Linda's hand. "You are already blessed in so many ways." But Linda no longer found solace in these words. She forced a smile, pretending to believe them, but in the privacy of her home, she wept. She watched Amara's children run to their mother, calling her name with love, and wondered why fate had chosen to withhold such joy from her. The distance between them grew subtly at first. Linda no longer visited as often, and when she did, she seemed distracted. Amara noticed but assumed Linda just needed space. Their long, heartfelt conversations became brief, and their daily laughter turned into polite smiles. Amara missed her friend, but didn't want to push. If Linda needed time, she would give it. What Amara didn't realize was that Linda wasn't just sad, she was beginning to resent her. The whispers of envy started as fleeting thoughts. Linda hated herself for feeling jealous, but she couldn't help it. She began noticing every little thing about Amara's life: how effortlessly happy she seemed, how her children adored her, how her husband looked at her with pride. It wasn't that Linda wished Amara harm, but she wished desperately that fate had balanced their lives differently. The more she thought about it, the more bitterness took root in her heart. One evening, as Amara playfully chased her youngest child around the yard, Linda stood by her window watching. A deep, unsettling thought crossed her mind. Why does she get to have everything while I have nothing? It was the first time such darkness had crept into her soul, and though she shook it off, it left a marcone that would only grow stronger with time. Her husband noticed the change in her. "Linda, you've been so distant lately," he said one night, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Linda forced a smile, shaking her head. "I'm fine," she lied. She didn't dare speak the truth because saying it out loud would mean admitting that she was no longer happy for Amara. Soon, even small interactions with Amara irritated her. When Amara excitedly told her about her eldest daughter's academic success, Linda barely reacted. When Amara's husband bought her a new dress, Linda couldn't help but feel bitterness twist in her gut. She has children, love, and a happy home. What do I have? The thoughts consumed her, turning admiration into quiet resentment. The final straw came when Amara casually mentioned that she and her husband were thinking of having another child. The words hit Linda like a slap. She barely held her composure, forcing a smile and muttering congratulations. But inside, something snapped. That night, as she lay awake in bed, a dangerous thought took shape. What if things were different? What if Amara's happiness was taken away? Would fate finally grant me what I desire? The thought haunted her for days, but she buried it deep, refusing to acknowledge the darkness growing within her. But fate has a way of feeding dangerous desires, and soon, an opportunity to act would present itself, one that Linda would be too desperate to resist. Days turned into weeks, and Linda's resentment deepened. She tried to silence the voice in her head that whispered cruel thoughts, but it was relentless. Every time she saw Amara laughing with her children, the bitterness within her sharpened. She convinced herself that it wasn't hatred she felt, it was injustice. Why should Amara have everything while she had nothing? She prayed for peace, but instead, she found herself dwelling on the idea that maybe fate needed a little push to balance their lives. Her husband noticed the growing darkness in her. "Linda, you're not yourself anymore," he said one evening. "You hardly smile, you barely talk. If something is wrong, tell me." Linda forced a laugh. "I'm just tired," she lied. "I need rest." But rest never came. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment where Amara's happiness outshone hers. She hated herself for feeling this way, but she hated Amara even more for being the cause. One afternoon, Linda visited Amara's home, trying to push away her jealous thoughts. Amara greeted her with a warm hug, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her friend. "I've missed you," Amara said cheerfully. "Come inside." Linda hesitated before stepping in. The house was filled with laughter as Amara's children played in the living room. Their joy felt like an insult, a reminder of what Linda could never have. As they sat together, Amara excitedly shared how she and her husband were planning a vacation with the children. "It'll be the first time we're all traveling together," she said, her eyes shining. Linda's fingers dug into her palm. She has it all and still wants more. The jealousy inside her twisted like a knife. She forced a smile, nodding along, but inside, she seethed. She left soon after, her mind swirling with emotions too dark to name. Later that night, Linda sat alone in her bedroom, staring at the flickering candle on her nightstand. The thought returned. What if Amara's happiness was taken away? The idea horrified her, but it also gave her a strange sense of relief. Was it so wrong to wish for fairness? If Amara lost something precious, wouldn't that make life more balanced? She shuddered, shaking off the thought, but deep down, she knew she had already crossed a dangerous line. The following week, Linda overheard village women gossiping about a herbalist who could change destinies. "They say he can open doors for those who have been locked out of fortune," one woman whispered. Linda's heart pounded. Could this be the answer? That evening, she wandered toward the outskirts of the village, where the herbalist was said to live. Her hands trembled as she knocked on his door, unsure if she had the courage to go through with this. The door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with piercing eyes. "I know why you're here," he said before she could speak. Linda gasped, stepping back. The herbalist chuckled. "You seek a change in fate." His voice was low, knowing. "Tell me, child, what is it that you want?" Linda hesitated. She could still turn back, pretend this never happened. But then Amara's laughter echoed in her mind, and all hesitation vanished. "I want what she has," Linda whispered. The herbalist studied her for a moment before nodding. "Balance must be restored then," he said cryptically. He reached into a wooden chest, pulling out a small vial of dark liquid. "This will open the path for you. But be warned, when you shift fate, there is always a price." Linda barely heard his warning. She clutched the vial tightly, her heart racing. She didn't know exactly what it would do, and she didn't care. All she knew was that things were finally going to change. The next day, Linda found herself at Amara's home once again, forcing a warm smile. "I brought you a gift," she said, holding up a small container of soup she had prepared. Amara's face lit up. "You didn't have to," she exclaimed. Linda watched as Amara took the first spoonful, unaware of the tiny drop of liquid Linda had mixed into the broth. It wasn't meant to harm, just to shift fate, just as the herbalist had promised. Amara finished the meal, thanking Linda for her kindness. Linda left soon after, her heart pounding in anticipation. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew one thing: by morning, Amara's perfect life would no longer be so perfect. That night, Linda slept soundly for the first time in years, unaware of the storm she had just unleashed. Morning arrived, but with it came chaos. Linda awoke to distant cries, the kind that sent chills down her spine. She rushed outside, her heart hammering in her chest. Villagers gathered in front of Amara's home, their faces painted with worry. "What happened?" Linda asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. An elderly woman turned to her, eyes filled with concern. "Amara collapsed in the middle of the night. She hasn't woken up since." Linda's stomach twisted. This wasn't what she had expected. The herbalist had promised a shift in fate, but she had imagined something smaller, perhaps Amara's business failing or her husband leaving. Not this. She felt her legs weaken beneath her, but she couldn't afford to look guilty. "Is she breathing?" she asked, trying to mimic concern. "Barely," another woman answered. "Her husband has gone to fetch the healer." The healer arrived, a frail old woman known for her wisdom. She examined Amara, her face darkening. "Something unnatural is at work here," she murmured. "Her spirit is struggling, caught between realms." The villagers whispered among themselves, their unease growing. Linda's breath hitched. Caught between realms? That hadn't been part of the plan. She forced herself to remain calm, but deep inside, panic clawed at her throat. Amara's husband, his eyes red with worry, fell to his knees beside his wife. "Please, tell me what to do," he begged the healer. The woman sighed. She must fight her way back. If she doesn't, her spirit will drift too far to return. Gasps filled the air. Linda's hands trembled. Had she just killed her best friend? Hours passed, and Amara remained unconscious. Her children sat by her side, their small hands clutching hers. Linda watched from a distance, guilt gnawing at her insides. She had wanted justice, not tragedy. But the scene before her looked like a cruel punishment rather than a fair trade. She turned away, unable to bear it any longer. That night, unable to rest, Linda returned to the herbalist. "You didn't tell me this would happen," she hissed, slamming the vial onto his wooden table. The old man looked up, unfazed. "I told you there would be a price," he said calmly. "Did you think fate could be altered so easily?" Linda's nails dug into her palms. "You need to fix this." The herbalist chuckled darkly. "There is no undoing what has been set in motion," he said. "But if you wish to help her, there is one way." Linda's breath caught. "What is it?" He leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "Fate is a balance. To bring her back, you must be willing to trade something equally precious." Linda's blood ran cold. "You mean my life?" The herbalist shrugged. "Your life, your happiness, your most treasured possession. The choice is yours." Linda felt her throat tighten. She had wanted to ruin Amara's happiness, not risk her own. Could she sacrifice something so dear just to undo what she had done? She fled from the herbalist's home, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. She had always believed she was strong. But was she strong enough for this? The truth was, she didn't know. All she knew was that time was running out. The next morning, Amara's condition worsened. The healer shook her head. "She does not have long." The words sent a shiver down Linda's spine. She had never imagined that jealousy could turn into something this dark. Now, standing before the wreckage she had caused, she realized the true weight of her actions. She watched as Amara's husband held her frail body, tears streaming down his face. The sight broke something inside Linda. She had spent so long believing that Amara had taken everything from her, but now she saw the truth: Amara had only ever been kind. And in return, Linda had stolen everything from her. Tears filled her eyes. "I have to fix this," she whispered to herself. But was she truly ready for the cost? Linda sat in the dim light of her small hut, her mind racing with the herbalist's words. The weight of her actions pressed down on her chest like an unbearable burden. Amara was slipping away, and Linda had the power to save Herbert at what cost? The thought of losing something precious frightened her, but the guilt of letting Amara die was even worse. She had never imagined her jealousy would lead to this. Now, she was faced with a decision that could change both their fates forever. The village was silent that night, yet Linda felt as though the world was screaming at her. The wind howled outside, rattling the wooden shutters of her home. Her hands trembled as she reached for the vial the herbalist had given her. It had set this chaos in motion. Perhaps it could end it too. But the price? She swallowed hard, wondering what she could possibly offer that was equal to Amara's life. With a deep breath, she made her way back to the herbalist's hut, her feet heavy with dread. The old man was waiting, as if he had known she would return. "You've made your choice?" he asked, his voice unreadable. Linda hesitated before nodding. "Yes, I can't let her die." The herbalist studied her for a moment before reaching into a wooden box. He pulled out a dark liquid in a small bottle, its contents swirling ominously. "Drink this," he instructed. "Whatever you cherish most will be taken from you." Linda's hands shook as she took the bottle. "Will it be my life?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The herbalist smirked. "Not necessarily. Fate will decide." Linda's heart pounded. She had no choice now. Closing her eyes, she brought the bottle to her lips and drank. The taste was bitter, burning down her throat like fire. Almost immediately, a sharp pain shot through her body, and the world around her blurred. She collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath as a strange sensation overtook her. Memories flashed before her eyes: her childhood, her friendship with Amara, moments of laughter and love. Then, something shifted. A cold emptiness settled in her chest, and when she opened her eyes, something was missing. She didn't know what it was, but she felt hollow, as if a part of her soul had been taken. The herbalist nodded, satisfied. "It is done. Amara will wake." Linda barely heard him. She staggered out of the hut, her body weak, her mind spinning. She had saved Amara, but at what cost? As she made her way back to the village, a strange unease settled over her. Something had changed, something she couldn't quite place. By the time she reached Amara's home, the villagers were gathered, whispering among themselves. Then a gasp broke through the air. "She's waking up!" someone cried. Linda's breath caught as Amara's eyes fluttered open. Relief washed over the crowd, and her husband fell to his knees, weeping with joy. Linda's chest tightened. She had done the right thing. She had saved her friend. But as she took a step forward, something felt wrong. People walked past her, their eyes never landing on her. She called out to a woman she knew, but there was no response. Panic flared in her chest. She rushed toward Amara's husband. "She's awake," she said, but he didn't even glance at her. It was as if she wasn't there. Then, the realization struck her like a thunderbolt. The price had been paid. Linda had been erased. She stumbled back, her hands trembling. The villagers moved around her, laughing, crying, rejoicing, but no one saw her. She turned to the window, peering at her own reflection, but there was none. Her breath hitched. The cost of saving Amara had been her very existence. She hadn't lost her life, but she had lost her place in the world. Tears welled in her eyes as she watched Amara embrace her family, oblivious to the sacrifice Linda had made. A deep sorrow filled her, but at the same time, she knew she had done what was right. And perhaps, in the end, that was enough. Linda turned away, walking into the night, unseen and unheard. A whisper of a soul, a shadow lost to fate. Linda wandered through the village, her heart pounding with confusion and sorrow. People she had known all her life passed by her without a single glance, as if she had never existed. She reached out to touch an old neighbor, but her hand passed through the woman's shoulder like mist. Horror crept into her bones. She had not just been forgotten, she had become a ghost, a mere whisper in the wind. Desperation gripped her as she ran toward her childhood home. Perhaps her mother would see her, recognize her. But when she arrived, she found her mother sitting alone, gazing at the fire with empty eyes. Linda called out, her voice shaking, "Mama, it's me!" But there was no response. Her mother didn't even flinch. It was as if Linda had never been born. Tears streamed down her face as she backed away. She turned toward the marketplace, where she and Amara had once spent hours laughing, sharing secrets, and dreaming about their futures. Now, She watched as Amara, newly recovered, walked among the stalls, her smile radiant. The villagers gathered around, celebrating her miraculous healing. Linda should have felt joy, relief. But instead, she felt hollow. She tried again, stepping in front of Amara. "Amara, it's me. I saved you," she cried. But Amara walked right through her. A cold realization settled over Linda. She had become nothing more than a shadow, a forgotten presence lingering in the world she once called home. She staggered back, her mind racing. Could she ever return? Would she remain trapped in this limbo forever? She turned toward the herbalist's hut, her only hope left. If anyone understood the depth of this curse, it was him. But when she reached the clearing where his hut had stood, there was nothing. No traces of the wooden structure, no footprints in the dirt, just an empty space, as if the herbalist had never existed. A chill ran through Linda's spine. Was this fate's way of sealing her punishment? Had the herbalist been a mere spirit, sent to collect her price before vanishing forever? The thought made her stomach twist. She was truly alone. Days passed, and Linda watched the village move on without her. Amara continued her life, oblivious to the sacrifice that had saved her. Her husband adored her, her children clung to her, and the villagers whispered of her miraculous survival. But no one spoke of Linda. No one even remembered her name. She followed her mother for days, lingering in the shadows, desperate for a sign that she still existed in someone's heart. But nothing changed. Even her childhood room was different, no traces of her belongings, no evidence that she had ever slept in that bed. Her very history had been rewritten, erasing her entirely. The weight of it crushed her, but she could not even cry. How could one mourn when there was no one left to hear their sorrow? Then, one evening, as she sat by the riverbank, staring at her own invisible hands, she heard a soft voice. "You are still here." She turned sharply, her heart racing. Standing before her was a little girl no older than 10, with bright, curious eyes. Linda gasped. "You can see me?" The girl nodded. "Yes. I don't know why, but I can." Hope flickered in Linda's chest. "Who are you?" she whispered. The girl tilted her head. "I don't know, but I think I've seen you before. In a dream." Linda's breath caught. Could this child hold the key to breaking her curse? Or was she simply a cruel reminder that she still existed, yet could never truly return? The wind rustled through the trees as the girl reached out her hand. "Come with me," she said softly. Linda hesitated. She had lost everything: her name, her life, her place in the world. But for the first time since vanishing, someone had acknowledged her. And perhaps, just perhaps, that meant all was not lost. With one final glance at the village she had once called home, Linda took the child's hand. The world shimmered around her, and for the first time in days, she felt the faintest trace of warmth. As they walked into the unknown, one thought echoed in her mind. Fate had taken everything from her, but maybe, just maybe, it wasn't finished with her yet. As Linda walked through the village, she felt like a ghost in a world that had moved on without her. But fate was not done with her yet. A little girl led her to a familiar house, Amara's home. When Amara stepped out and saw Linda, shock and disbelief filled her eyes. Linda, overcome with guilt, fell to her knees and confessed everything: the jealousy, the betrayal, and the dark path she had walked. She admitted that life had punished her beyond measure and that she had lost everything. "I don't deserve forgiveness," she whispered, broken. Amara, though deeply hurt, saw the suffering in Linda's eyes. Instead of holding on to hatred, she chose grace. "You have suffered enough," she said, reaching out her hand. "I forgive you." With those words, the burden Linda had carried for years lifted. She stayed in the village, rebuilding her life, not as the proud woman she once was, but as someone who had learned from her mistakes. In time, the whispers faded, and she found peace. Moral lessons: jealousy destroys, but redemption is possible through humility. Forgiveness is not about forgetting, but about freeing oneself from hatred. Life always gives a chance for change, but only if one is willing to take it.